only 25% of churches in 2023 experienced growth over 2022.
Whoa.
So if your church, another way to say that is if your church grew in 2023, you're in the top 25%. Most were flat, if not declining. The more sobering stat, I believe, some pastors are paying attention to this, I think too few are paying attention, is most of the so-called growth or new attenders we see are really just transfer growth. That's not a new trend. That was in place before COVID, but it's accelerating. The best I can see today is about 80% of church growth is transfer growth. There's entire denominations where, and I won't name names not to single anybody out, but a large denomination I recently was studying, 48% of the churches in that denomination experienced no converts or baptisms in the last year.
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I'm so glad you joined us. Hey, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe. You will get fantastic episodes like this one. I sit down with Brad Hill. We're going to talk about how to more than double your outreach impact as a church, where the future of tech is going, and a whole lot more. Hey, I just got back from a week in Guatemala. And I got to tell you, I love the work Compassion is doing. My wife, Tony, and I, we sponsor some children, and we got to meet them personally. Some of them for the first time. They're newly sponsored kids. One we've been sponsoring for over a decade. And I got to tell you, it's one of the most powerful experiences. But what really inspires me is the job that Compassion is doing on the ground through the local church. So if you're wondering what you can do to make an impact personally or organizationally as a church, you can have a Compassion Sunday come to your church absolutely free. To learn more, go to compassion.com/Carey. I got to tell you, it's changed my life. It's going to change the lives of a lot of people in your church, not to mention the people that you're able to help through it. And GENERIS, they are on a mission to close the gap between your current resources and your vision. That's something that every church leader struggles with. You got a vision, then you got what you've got, right? Which is not quite up to the level of the vision. So for free financial reporting resources and tools to better understand your church's generosity health, visit generis.com/Carey. And now to my conversation with Brad Hill. Brad, so delighted to have you on the podcast.
Carey, it's good to be with you. This is going to be fun.
Yeah. So we've known each other for years, but going to introduce a lot of listeners to you today. And I always love sitting down and picking your brain, having conversations with you, talking about trends, talking about what's happening in the church. And like me, you've been at it a little while. So I want to go back 25 years. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in how churches approach ministry over the last 25 years, Brad?
Well, yeah, it makes me feel old saying, let's go back 25 years.
Yeah. Well, back to your childhood, Brad.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a blessing overall, Carey, for me to be in this weird niche space in the sense of technology in the church. And, thinking about those years, I have seen some really distinct, almost like acts of a play, it seems like, going back 25 years, I guess, would carry us back to the 90s. And this was a period where just the idea of using technology in your church, I think, was very new, a little bit foreign. We were still getting used to computers. This is pre-internet for most of us, right? And so running spreadsheets, for example, to maybe think about the accounting in our church, or maybe having a database of church members instead of having handwritten rolls, typewriters. That was like one era, just introducing the concept of technology in a church. I think it was very administrative for the most part, is what we tended to see. And then, the internet came around right around the turn of 2000. And through that next decade, I just watched, and, one of the companies I started, Carey, Site Organic, was kind of early to the party of this idea of churches having websites. And I remember talking to so many pastors who were asking, why would I have a website? Why would I be on the internet? Like raising real objections. This was new, and they had heard bad things, or there were concerns about this World Wide Web deal. And so just watching that adoption curve, really took us about 10 years or so, I think, to get comfortable with churches online. And
Even
then,
from a web, like Web 1.0.
oh, totally.
Yeah.
That's right. And also some of that floppy disk software started to gradually migrate to what we now know as the cloud, but paying a subscription to a church database or maybe a mobile app or whatever, that was just beginning to enter the common, mindset in, let's say, 2010. And that next decade, 2010 to 2020, I think the cloud took over. And the other big shift I saw was in giving and generosity. I think, this idea of having tithes and offerings paid online, paid digitally, really foreign concept. Pastors raising lots of objections. Again, well, I heard there's fees, and won't my congregation just give online so they can get the miles? That was one of my favorites. And so we've seen that, and it's interesting in all cases. I think the church generally has a little bit of an arms crossed posture when new technology comes around. There's some early adopters, but it takes us a little while to figure out if we're going to embrace something new. And I think here we are in the footsteps of AI and cloud technology, but this idea of Web3. And I know we'll get into this, but where we're going next, I'm seeing maybe more openness this time, it feels, to churches being willing and open to try new stuff, which is encouraging compared to those last several rounds that I watched.
Well, let's talk about early adopters. I'm glad that phrase came up because, you're sort of reliving my ministry. I started in 1995. I think I got an email address in 1996, and it was dial-up and it was slow and the whole deal. And your chronology is pretty accurate. We might have been a few years ahead, but not a lot. I'm curious, when you look back over the last 25 years, what did happen to those early adopters in tech? I mean, I'm thinking about Life Church. You're right. A lot of churches were questioning, should we even have a website? And I smiled because, do you remember when church websites had music on them? I mean, for those who remember, it was like some Lutheran hymn or something, or Presbyterian hymn. I'm Presbyterian in background. That was playing in the background when you went on a website, and little sheep like floating above. Anyway, it was weird. It was a weird era. But like Life Church pioneered church online in 2006. And when you think that a lot of churches were asking the question, should we even have a website? And Life Church says, we're going to try church online. And other churches were doing video campuses. What is the early mover advantage on tech? And maybe we should, to be fair, cover some of the disadvantages too.
Well, I think, I guess maybe request permission to reframe a bit, only in the sense of, I think there's really a mindset of curiosity, maybe innovation that you see in certain churches. I mean, you brought up Life Church, and you're right. They pioneered church online. Brandon Kennedy, Terry Storch, Bobby Grunwald, all those guys. I mean, hats off. But there's also some things that Life Church did early on. Like, you remember Second Life?
I do. I do remember Second Life.
This idea of virtual reality. And I think Life Church might have been the first, or certainly one of the first, to pioneer having a campus in virtual reality space. And it was interesting. It was kind of a fascination. I don't know that, folks would say that that was like a lasting idea, but man, I saw that was just, to me, another exhibit of them having this mindset of, we're always going to be willing to try something new if it means we could reach one more. And, Jeff Reed does great work with Church Digital, and there's so many others that evoke that mindset. So whether that, I think by definition, those people then fall into that early adopter category. But there is sometimes like an early in general consumer tech products, iPhone, iPad, electric vehicles. There's always that person that wants to be first on the block just because that gives them a dopamine hit or whatever. And that you see that sometimes in the church, but I'm more drawn to those churches and those leaders who are saying, like, we're going to stay curious. We're going to stay really mindful of shifts, and we're going to make some bets, right? And some of those are going to pay off, and some of them, like Second Life or MySpace or whatever, are going to come and go. But I really respect those leaders that are willing to try new things.
Yeah, and I don't want to misquote Craig, but I'm pretty sure on this show, or at least in a conversation I had with him, he said, that whole Second Life experiment, which didn't last a long time, was kind of a precursor into virtual reality. When virtual reality sort of got a big kick in 2021 and churches jumped back in, this was their second iteration. The other thing too, to be fair, it's like a church like Life Church or even different congregations that were early in on video. They didn't invent video venues. They didn't invent Second Life. They didn't become a software company. They're just like, hey, we could jump on this. And you look at the success of Apple, a lot of people would say Apple's known as an innovative company, but it's not that innovative. What Steve Jobs did when he was alive was he waited for everybody else to experiment with tablets for a while and smartphones for a while. And then he was like second wave. And all right, well, tablets are dead. Here's one that actually works, and introduced the iPad. Or here's a phone without a screen. See how you like that. And then, within a few years, BlackBerry was dethroned. Any thoughts on that? That, it's not necessarily that we're the first, it's that we've taken other people's ideas and leveraged them for good.
Yeah, there's a great book called Unlocking the Customer Value Chain. And it talks about in everything we pursue in our lives, buying groceries, booking a plane ticket, whatever. There's a series of steps you go through. And some of those steps create value. And some of those steps actually are kind of a hassle, or they might destroy value. And I think when I've kind of studied this a little bit, the leaders in the church who are really, kind of chalked up as innovators or these early adopters, you're right. It's not that they're trying to go first all the time or invent, but they're looking at how might this technology either save some value destroying activity or enhance something that creates value. So in the case of like live streaming church services, early days, that was an attempt both to reach people that weren't coming into our buildings or reach generations that were maybe more comfortable. And then, man, when we all hit COVID pandemic, this became almost like a requirement that we were all using. But, there's a big debate in the church with streaming. Is it a front door? Is it a back door? And I think what we're finding is that it can be a fluid experience, but having a live stream for your church, just to use that example, I would argue creates value net because it allows you to reach people that you haven't reached, and you get to decide. And you've been great on this point, Carey, that do you want to keep them there? Do you want to encourage them or sometimes guilt them into coming to the building? Nonetheless, I think that using these technologies, it's a really interesting concept to say, what is the value chain people go through when they encounter us and we're trying to disciple people? And is there a piece of technology that may exist to help us just make one little part of that chain better?
If you think about the diffusion of innovation curve, you have the innovators, the early adopters, early majority, late majority, and then laggards. So I would say I'm probably more an early adopter. I'm not an innovator. I just wait to see when somebody else has started something. I'm like, ooh, that looks good. I think I'll get in on it. And that's true how I ran the church and how I've run this company. Wasn't the first to the podcast space, but got in, a decade ago when it now seems like pioneer days. Didn't seem like that in 2014, but it seems like that now. What happens? So we talked a little bit about early adopters. If there's more, please add more. But I'd really like to also talk about what happens to the laggards. What happens to the people who are like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm staying as far away as possible from AI. We are not going to digital giving. I know everybody else has, although that one's sort of a false debate. When there's money involved, churches tend to get innovative. So I didn't mean that to be cynical. It's just a realistic statement. What about the laggards? What happens to them?
Well, I think this is really interesting, and I want to tread carefully too, because God's wired all of us. Like you just said, you're an early adopter, and there are some of us that, really that whole diffusion curve you just laid out is a little bit of a picture of risk tolerance for everyone. Like it takes courage to be first on the block and try something new, and be a leader who makes a decision that may come back to haunt me later. So that there's a sense where there's courage, but I think there's also just a wiring. There's an appreciation for tried and true, for the sacred, for tradition. All of those things are good things, and like anything else, can be taken to an extreme. I would say though that the laggards tend to maybe be wired that way to not want to take risks, to understand the water's safe before I go in. But even like going way back in technology, let's talk about like the printing press.
Mm-hmm.
Early adopters and innovators back in Gutenberg's day were decried by some people as heretics, as sinful, because they were daring to take God's word and put it into a form that could be read by the masses. I mean, this was a risky leadership decision. And yet, isn't it interesting that today's laggards, quote unquote, would cling to paper Bibles and might eschew a Bible app. And so to me, it's just it's a cycle. And I think that there's a little bit of a timing to it. I might make one other point, Carey, which I think is often overlooked. And that's governance of our churches, especially. I've, had the privilege and honor to serve on a couple boards of churches and elders and things. And what I see in pastors often is that even in the best of relationships that the pastor may have with the board or the council or the session, there is a certain amount of scrutiny or pressure put by that governing entity on what matters in our church. And if what matters is, more traditional metrics, attendance, giving, budget, which are all good things, by the way, I think that you produce essentially a leader that's going to manage to the metrics in some way. On the other hand, one of the things we're focusing a lot on right now with Gloo and our partnership with Barna, you've been involved in this too, is the idea of, hey, we're called to make disciples, Matthew 28. Could we measure, or are there metrics even where we're not taking the work of the Holy Spirit out, but we're choosing to say the way that we want to orient our church is based on how the people are doing, not how our church is doing necessarily. And that level of sort of curiosity and interest, let's say by a board or elder council, might produce different behavior in a pastor that says, I'm going to be curious about what I could do now to bring in technology or bring in tools to help me with this. And we see some great examples where in one case, I'm thinking a pastor who has really adopted an interesting mindset of measuring people and understanding the health of the congregation, has managed that way now for a number of years. And as he's done that, the attendance and giving follow. But he's really managing, I would say, in a very different way than I see a lot of churches. So that innovation, that early adopter mindset, I think transcends not just tech tools, but method and other ways that we're leading our congregations and managing our church. And I think a lot of that starts at the very top with how our leadership teams scrutinize, our results.
Point well taken. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. The governance structure, the board or whoever is, the pastor reports to, is really in a place to set those expectations. And as you were talking about going all the way back to Gutenberg, there's not a single person listening who still copies manuscripts by hand with scribes, right? Like it's Kevin Kelly's phrase. Some of this stuff's inevitable. It's just how we're all going to be one day. And inevitably, most people get swept up by a technological innovation. Similarly, I don't think there's anybody riding by horseback, even if you're Methodist, from church to church on a Sunday morning anymore, right? It does catch up with us. So you've got an experience as a tech founder. How has that shaped your perspective on leveraging resources, new resources for the kingdom, tech resources?
Well, in a sense, like you, Carey, I'm probably curious or, on the spectrum, more early adopter, looking at what's new, what's out there on the horizon. And just my weird lens is always when I see a new technology, I'm asking the question, how could this be applied to ministry? But then the hard work really starts, because then you're turning then to those who are really leading or operating in vocational ministry often. and trying to convince them or trying to show them, hey, this is a really big deal. You should pay attention to it. So there's a little bit of I don't know, not prophetic, but like almost Pied Piper sense in those who see the possibility and then have to translate it into those who are actually doing. And so through my companies and experiences I've had, I have rhythms. Like I try to be with 1 to 2 pastors a week minimum, and ask a lot of questions, be in their world, be curious, but also maybe try to connect dots. I see a cool technology, I see something possible, and try to essentially just be a translation engine to them. And in the process, that can look like starting a company. It can look like being a great ministry. I've kind of operated in a lot of different contexts there. It's fun for me when I get a call from a pastor who says, you told me about this 2 years ago, and I finally got a chance to try it out. By the way, one last point on the elder board thing. You should always have someone in your circle, either on that leadership team or maybe on your staff, who makes you a little uncomfortable, maybe about trying new things. I think it's a good, healthy practice to have someone who's, maybe you take 10% of their ideas, but I think that's a good practice. And that might be a next gen leader that you have close to you. So sometimes I'm that guy to pastors I talk to and pastors I know.
So before you joined Gloo, you were the president at Ministry Brands for a number of years. What was the idea behind Ministry Brands?
Yeah, so Ministry Brands actually got its start with on a single day, 3 small tech companies got together, one of which was mine, called Site Organic, which was a church website company. And the other 2 were just starting this weird world of online giving and tithing and payments. And the simple idea at the beginning was nothing more, Carey, than, hey, wouldn't it be interesting if we could help a church with a website and online giving together and kind of bundle that, save them time.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was a very, I would say, simple, humble beginning. This was 2012. And through the next several years, we found opportunities to add more to the basket, if you will. So websites, yes. Online giving, yes. Also things though like mobile apps, background checks for children's volunteers and workers, then looking at streaming, financial accounting. And one of the things that Ministry Brands did in those early days we kind of had at every moment a decision: do we build it or do we find someone who's already doing it and maybe buy or acquire them? And Ministry Brands perhaps is better known for really ushering in a pretty major wave of acquisitions in the church tech space. And that was a little bit unsettling, I think, to some, because all of us in this church space really haven't seen that kind of acquisitive activity. But what it did allow Ministry Brands to do was, number one, scale rapidly and also have a degree of resourcing to serve. When I left in 2018, we were at about 50,000 churches. I think they've climbed quite a bit since then. But having that scale to be not quite a one-stop shop, but a more unified set of services. We heard at the time a lot of pastors saying things like, what I don't need is one more tech tool. I'm managing like 10, 12, 15 different SaaS tools, and I pay subscriptions and my data doesn't work. And so we were, seeking to solve a lot of that. I would also say that we bumped into a lot of challenges. When you scale that quickly, I personally presided over 43 acquisitions during the time I was at Ministry Brands.
In 6 years.
Yeah, it's a lot. I think our high water month, we might have done five acquisitions in one month.
Wow.
So a lot of interesting leadership lessons there with culture and systems and whatnot. But nonetheless, I think we learned a lot of good lessons there about both scale and I would say also the importance of aligned capital. Making sure that as a company grows, these are for-profit companies that serve churches. How do you ensure that the mission stays pure, that the mission and the money are aligned? And all of those lessons, I think, were really, played out in a great way at Ministry Brands. And I've carried a lot of those great lessons with me, onto service at Gloo and beyond.
Yeah. What were some of the lessons about rapid scale that you learned? Because that was, I remember watching it in real time, a meteoric rise for Ministry Brands. It's like, who are you to? They're everywhere.
Right. Well, I think you can fake it for a period of time. And so what I mean by that is we were doing a lot of these deals. And what was great, Carey, was we were normally acquiring companies that were serving churches, had been founded by people that had a passion just like I had when I started my church website business. So I could sit across the table from this founder and talk about the kingdom expansion possibilities of their company joining this big thing called Ministry Brands. And we, in many cases, kept those founders on. And we were able to do that quickly and to an extent rest on the fact that because that founder was still here, they knew their business. We didn't have to rush to learn all the nooks and crannies of what they were doing. We could kind of, bring them in, find what we call synergies, and not have to do a full integration overnight. And you could do that with the first 5, 6, maybe 10 companies. But as you grow past that, the ability to have, I'll just speak very practically, like the ability to have 12 or 20 different accounting systems, that doesn't work. We were dealing with things as mundane as phone systems to employee benefits and just a lot of really basic but super critical issues that only kept snowballing as we acquired more things. So I think one of the big lessons there was for us to have a playbook and to have a clear process and have leaders dedicated to just what's called post-merger integration, PMI, so that, Ministry Brands or whoever is doing the acquiring understands and can communicate, welcome in. Here's why we're excited to have you join what we're doing. And here's what the first 30 days, 60, 90, 100 days are going to look like. And on the other side of it, here's where we hope to get. It took us a while to develop that type of rigor. But we got there, and even now at Gloo, we're doing some of the same as Gloo begins to find opportunities to bring other brands in. So it's a whole discipline, though, to just understand the world of mergers, acquisitions, and some of the stats are sobering. I read one stat that was as many as 75 to 80% of acquisitions fail. And the number one reason for that is culture.
Yep.
As you're bringing teams in, just how are you thinking about the people side of things? So it was an MBA for sure in 6 short years.
Well, and those are great field notes for churches. I got a question today about someone wanting to acquire another church, right? When you think about church mergers, and that's the stuff nobody thinks of: the systems, the accounting, the whole back end, the culture. And not all the mergers work in church world either. So those are really good field notes. So you're at Gloo these days. Can you just explain? I mean, Gloo's been a partner on this podcast. That's not why you're here. I wanted to pick your brain on a lot of things, but what exactly does Gloo do?
Sure. Well, I mean, in a nutshell, Gloo is a tech platform, and we've got about 150 folks working on our team. Our headquarters is in Boulder, Colorado. But the tech platform that we're building, Carey, is really designed around a very big mission. And what that simply means is we want to connect the church. And we see a need for that because the church is actually rich in resources. God's put a lot of abundance in lots of places, but it's somewhat siloed today just in the way we, quote, do church. And so Gloo thinks of ourselves really as a set of infrastructure. You can almost think of it like the plumbing underground a city or under the ground in a city. And things flow through the pipes, right? And so for Gloo, we think of 4 primary things that kind of get exchanged through the pipes of Gloo. Real quickly, it's resources. So leaders on Gloo get access to great resources such as, for example, Carey Nieuwhof courses or prayer series, apps and content and a whole range of resources. Those get exchanged. A second would be people. And, we've talked, you and I have talked a lot about what patterns we're seeing around outreach and church growth and evangelism. But, Gloo is now supporting dozens and dozens of campaigns and events and media ministries that are finding people but have little to no place to send them. Meanwhile, you have churches that would love to have new people coming through. There's a need for connection there, right? So Gloo is sitting in between the people connection side. We call them explorers. So you have resources, you have people. We also think about data and insights. How can leaders be better informed and understand what's happening in their people, understand what's happening in their community, maybe in their networks? So we're doing a lot of work, and that's especially central to our work with the Barna Group and something we're planning next year, the State of the Church 2025. And then the final interesting fourth leg of the stool is funding. And we've been seeing a lot of patterns, Carey, and this is, I'm not talking about church giving or tithing necessarily, but more about just how money flows through the Christian ecosystem, if you will. Only about 20 to 30% of Christian giving actually goes through a local church, which was really interesting. So far more capital actually goes to direct donations to parachurch or other types of generosity that doesn't hit an offering plate. But there's a lot of latent capital. There's a lot of money, and you've had some guests on your show before who are great on this, but there's a lot of money sitting that's already kind of earmarked for nonprofit, faith-oriented giving, but it's not moving.
Through donor advised funds, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right.
Yeah, but it's
so
not
a lot of the
going
money
anywhere.
is parked.
Yeah.
So Gloo, what we see is an opportunity, and we've heard patterns from donors of why that money maybe doesn't move. And we see some opportunities. And in fact, we've already been prototyping some concepts that are, in fact, animating capital that was sitting still. So that's a fourth exchange. You have resources, people, data, funding, and all those things kind of are, the pipes we're building are oriented to help those connect. So that's the big idea. There's simple, practical things that pastors use Gloo for. We have about 73,000 churches today on the platform. But we serve every entity that's in any part of the church. You guys are a great partner with us, Carey, but there's many others. It's a big vision that we're trying to chase.
Yeah, what's interesting, because you talk to a lot of people about Gloo and the mystery, the mission is a mystery. But I think what I appreciate about it from my conversations with you, Scott, and others, Scott Beck, that is, and other members of the team, is if you think about the way the church has evolved, it was kind of an individual sport. You came in with your denomination or you were a Congregationalist church. And there was good reason. I mean, you had your community to reach. That was about everybody that you had in your scope. And then as communication increased, broadcasting, we got ideas from other places. We'd get on airplanes and fly to conferences. And then denominations started to break down. And you had parachurch organizations, kind of nonprofits, rise up and sort of unite people who are not normally united. But organizations like Promise Keepers came and they went. And now you see a lot of little startups and initiatives and local church networks and this and that and mission organizations. But there's nothing pulling the whole thing together. And in some ways, you're seeing organizations that served a historic purpose die, but there's nothing really connecting everybody. And that's sort of the vision as I see it behind Gloo. Is that right?
Yeah, you nailed it, Carey. I mean, in fact, I love to use the phrase individual sport. One of the things I talk on sometimes is that ministry, really God designed ministry to be a team sport.
Yeah.
There's so many articulations in the New Testament, especially about the body of Christ and the different roles that we all have. And any local church, even the biggest, like you said, Life Church, all the way down to the normal sized churches, can't, by definition, can't be all things to all people. And yet we lack some of those important structures and, I would argue, resources and mindsets to kind of live in our lane, bring in those other ministries and partners that have competencies in other lanes so we can serve the whole person. And we've seen this play out in many other industries over decades and centuries even. Airlines used to all have their own reservation systems, and now there's a pretty centralized service for that. Healthcare was all over the map. There was no common measurement of blood pressure or HIPAA records. And now it's sometimes painful. You're in Canada, so I don't know. You guys have a different model, but
we have our own system that everybody thinks is falling apart. But anyway, you do get seen, and I'm alive, which is good. But you know what? It's same thing. Like car dealers. My oldest son's a coder. Jordan, and one of his projects when he was graduating from university was to work on the system that every dealer in North America, maybe the world, uses when you buy or lease a new car. It's just like GM uses the same software as Audi does, and it's serviced by a central company. And, I remember, and this is going somewhere, this is a little bit of history to get us into the future. But like, I remember sitting down in my office 20 years ago, trying to write a mission and vision statement. And it's hard, man, from scratch, pulling words out of the air. And I was following Willow at the time. I heard about North Point, and then I heard about North Point's vision and mission. And I thought, that is better than I could articulate it. Within a couple of years, we're a North Point strategic partner. It's like, oh, that whole framework is now done for me. So I can, because we were so close, it was like a little bit of etymology here and there. And then, okay, now I can focus on leading the local church. And I wonder, because it was an individual sport, a solo sport, whether that cooperation has to be a bigger part of the future, particularly as America becomes more Christian. So let's switch gears a little bit, because this is getting to tech and AI. You identified something earlier that I think is really interesting. Most people are like, I don't even know how many subscriptions I have, right? I have Netflix, and then I have some sports channel, and then I got, this and that and the other thing, and I got these apps that I pay, et cetera. So, people have, we went from cable, which was one bill a month, to all this fractionalization. And I think maybe that's in unlocking the customer value chain. I can't remember whether it was a book that you and Scott gave me to read or not. But if you look at history, it's bundling, unbundling, bundling, unbundling.
Right.
Unbundling was over-the-air TV. We have multiple networks. You just put your antennae up. Then cable bundled everything together so you can get all kinds of channels. The internet unbundled everything. Now you're getting back into bundling, so that if you get Disney Plus, you also get, and then you get, and then you get, et cetera. And I probably think we'll see more bundling. When it comes to tech and AI, are we in an unbundling stage that may go to more bundling? What do you see?
Yeah, it's a great framing. I think that AI right now is maybe in act one and a half of the play, maybe. Last year, we're recording this in 2024. Last year, we saw ChatGPT, and it was sort of like, boom, suddenly we're all talking generative AI, and it was just a fascination. I think a lot of everybody dabbled just to play with it, novelty. We're seeing now a little bit of an emergence of some practical tools within the church, and also within a lot of domains that use AI to do a task. And I see a lot of administrative tasks and repetitive tasks. Is AI coming for my job? It's like, well, I don't know. If your job is purely administrative, repetitive things, probably you should learn how to use AI. That would be smart. But I think moving forward, I see AI starting to apply to judgment and decisions, looking for patterns, whether it's, let's analyze the last 3 years of weather data to try to predict how many snow closings we may have in a given winter. Things like that, or patterns around attendance or volunteer engagement. Some of those things are interesting applications. Bundling those then with the volunteer scheduling tools we use, or other attendance trackers we use, like that would be interesting, and you are starting to see that. I think that in a lot of our work with AI, one of the big things Gloo has been, we have a whole initiative that Carey, called the AI in the Church Initiative, and we've brought a lot of thought leaders together, and we've done a lot of research with pastors, with theologians, also AI experts. Right now, what we're seeing is that pastors and leaders have a net cautious view on using AI compared to even their congregants. So the public, the individuals maybe are a little bit more open than leaders, and that could be good. That could be a good dynamic. But I think what we need is a little bit of time for this to play out, and we're seeing an emergence right now of so much innovation. We had an event, as the AI in the Church Hackathon. last fall, and we're doing it again this fall. It was one of the most fun things we've done at Gloo that I've been part of for a long time. And most heartening for me, just to see the creativity and the innovation of, people developing. If listeners don't know what a hackathon is, it's a compressed weekend where teams come and they're challenged to build something that solves a challenge. And we said the challenge is use AI to help a church or to build something around prayer, discipleship, evangelism, something like that. And the results we got back from 43 teams were mind blowing. So I left very encouraged. We're also surrounding all of that with great discussion around trust, privacy, and how do we think redemptively about using technologies that do carry risk. And so there's a lot of great work happening. I'm very, very bullish about where AI is going and how churches not should use it, but will use it. I think, our statement is that this isn't like we can't sit this one out. There's a moral imperative for the church to be kind of leaning in and being curious about AI. I mean, can you imagine if we had sat out the internet and no church was online? Like we may not be talking about the church.
Well, that was true to some extent until 2020, for the record. But true, yes, you're right. True. Good point.
We were dragged kicking and screaming. You make a good point.
So, okay, I want to, and I'm bullish on AI too. I mean, I have very big concerns. We've done a whole series on it. We'll continue to speak into it. But again, Kevin Kelly's phrase, it's inevitable. There's inevitability. Even if you say, I don't use AI, number one, that's not true. If you're even near a phone, a smartphone, you're using AI. You may not be intentionally using it, but you're using it. And similarly, your church software system is going to have, it already does have AI baked into it, or if it doesn't, it will very, very shortly. So there's an inevitability to it. But let's fast forward 5 years, Brad. What do you think, and I know this is speculative, we're going to see the AI landscape look like in the context of local church leadership? What will it make possible that isn't possible or is extremely difficult manual to do? Kind of like, when you mentioned accounting and using spreadsheets for church budgeting in the 90s. Yeah, that was innovative. I remember one of the churches I started at kept books in a ledger, like a written ledger with pen and ink, and it was awful. And the statements had to be typed up. So we got rid of that. And that was just a generation ago. And we moved to spreadsheets. So, I mean, when you think about that from a local congregation, what do you think is going to be the case 5 years from now that most of us will be using AI for?
I think it's really fun to dream about this and to think about what's possible. We're seeing right now, AI moving from generating text and images to now really good quality video. I think about our worship experiences. I think about where we pay to generate content today. There's no replacement for art necessarily, and expressing, God's amazing story through visuals. But I think using AI in the weekend experience is a clear early area where you're starting to see a lot of great applications. A mutual partner we have, Church.tech, is doing great work here. But 3 to 5 years out, which by the way is the pace at which this is all going, that feels like really risky to even dream past a year from now. But I do think that AI can spot patterns more effectively and broadly than any person can. And
well, in healthcare, that's true, right? You look at radiologists and reading what they read. AI is already doing a better job.
Right. Like help me scan 10,000 x-rays to predict the probability this patient has a diagnosis. That's right.
Yep.
And so I think that, there's been talk for a number of years now in the church about scaling. How do we scale? We've been through the mega church movement, the multi-site movement. There are others right now that are sort of predicting, as we see alternate models of church, that we may eventually be in a day where the church, a church, quote unquote, has millions of people in it, or there could be very very unlikely pairings of people who should be in community together. For example, today, I only speak English, I'm embarrassed to say. So I can't be in community with someone who speaks Hungarian or Taiwanese. But we're pretty much there where AI could help facilitate a real-time two-way conversation between people who speak very different languages.
I
And
just got back from Guatemala, and the way Google Translate has improved, like scanning menus and just seeing over top of it exactly what the English translation is in real time, having conversations in real time through ChatGPT. It's insane.
I
Sorry
was
for
I was
the
in Croatia last week, and I was excited that I use Google Translate, and the thing I thought I was ordering is actually what came to the table at the restaurant. So yeah, we're getting really close, and it's not a big leap of imagination. I would say to get to a point where AI can bring people together that maybe today it's more difficult to do. Um, a caution I would say that we always hold to though is God has wired all of us in relationship,
yeah.
and I think that there's an opportunity and a mandate on every pastor, every leader to sort of think about what I call this divide between the sacred and the synthetic. There's certain things that you will never replace the Holy Spirit. You will never have AI start to change theology. All those safeguards that are real risks, by the way. But there are other things where AI can open up doors that are completely impossible to even dream about today. But as leaders, we need to be discerning. We need to understand, like, where's that line? And today, what we're hearing from pastors is they would be comfortable with AI performing administrative tasks, maybe repurposing content, things like that. They would not be comfortable, on balance, having AI write a whole sermon or having AI tell me how to counsel this married couple sitting in front of me. Those are more hallowed spaces, I think, that most leaders would say, I actually don't want technology coming into this relationship. How can it support? So we're going to have some trial and error, I predict, over the next 3 to 5 years to figure out where that all goes. And the work we're doing right now, Gloo is just the platform. We've got tremendous partners from all corners coming in to work on this. It's, in a sense, AI is drawing together a lot of disparate ministries, all trying to sort this out for redemptive purposes. And that picture itself to me is beautiful. So I think 5 years from now, we should come back and have this conversation and see where it's taken us.
Well, and back to that, a couple of questions come to mind. One observation, then a question, I guess. But, back to that, what is going on in the church space? Denominations are probably not going to be able to break ground in AI. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a story I'm sitting on, and I'm not slamming denominations. But that's why, when you have a hackathon and you have all these startups or solopreneurs trying to figure out how to crack a code on behalf of the church, that's probably where the innovation is going to come from. And even large churches, they might make a few advances in AI, but I think companies that are dedicated to it and who have the ministry in mind would probably do the best job. The other question I guess I have is, because you've poured over the data even more than I have, why the hesitancy? Why so many laggards when it comes to technology, the future, and AI in the church? Do you have a theory on that?
Well, I think, we have to acknowledge that we're all stewarding a timeless, unchanging gospel message. And I think we have a tension in ministry almost by design of what should change and what should never change. AI can be used for a lot of nefarious purposes. And unfortunately today, most of us, general consumers, if we flip on cable news or read any sort of news reports about AI, we're probably going to walk away a little freaked out. I mean, there's a lot of kind of weird, at best, scary at worst uses of this. So it's normal, and I think it's understandable that a believing Christian is going to look at that with skepticism. That said, that's been true of every technology advance in history by definition. Yes. It can be used for good. It can be used for bad. Dave Ramsey's great on this point. A brick is amoral, but it can be used to build a hospital. It can be used to somebody throw through a window.
Yep.
And so AI, I think, is just a more powerful, and we don't fully understand it yet. Even the creators of AI, Sam Altman, Elon Musk, have been, articulate on this point that we don't fully understand yet what we've created.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be mindful as the church. Our point simply is the church could actually lead here. AI, Proverbs talks a lot about knowledge, understanding, and wisdom in that pattern. And, if Google and the internet brought us access to vast knowledge, AI, in a sense, is almost bringing a new type of understanding where it can analyze vast pools of knowledge and help us find patterns. But wisdom, that third, coveted leg of the stool, that's something that belongs to the image bearers of God. And that's something that God brings. So I take solace in that. But I understand laggards who might have a little bit of trepidation about, and by the way, seminaries, to my knowledge, don't teach pastors a lot of technology skills or discernment. So it's also, this feels like a domain that we're not equipped to even understand yet.
Yeah, it'd be great if there was a philosophy and theology of AI course. Maybe there is. I haven't heard of it. That would be great. I want to switch gears a little bit, talk about outreach. So I've got a stat in front of me. The number of pastors who say their church is very effective at outreach to non-church goers dropped from 13% in 2015 to 1% in 2023. In other words, 99% of pastors say that their church is not very good at outreach. That's a huge drop. I'm curious, first of all, thanks for the frank admission. Secondly, any idea what's fueling this decline?
Well, we're far enough past COVID. I've been trying to keep up with stats on church growth and attendance. And, once a lot of us experienced the return to the pews moment, those days felt good for a lot of churches. People are starting to show back up. That seems to have plateaued. And just was reading today, in fact, that only 25% of churches in 2023 experienced growth over 2022.
Whoa.
So if your church, another way to say that is if your church grew in 2023, you're in the top 25%. Most were flat, if not declining. The more sobering stat, I believe, some pastors are paying attention to this. I think too few are paying attention, is most of the so-called growth or new attenders we see are really just transfer growth. That's not a new trend. That was in place before COVID, but it's accelerating. The best I can see today is about 80% of church growth is transfer growth. There's entire denominations where, and I won't name names, not to single anybody out, but large denomination I recently was studying, 48% of the churches in that denomination experienced no converts or baptisms in the last year. So we're not on balance reaching new people. We're trading people, and I think pastors are maybe starting to come to grips with that, which might explain part of why the response to that Barna State of Pastors stat that you shared. That said, here's the conundrum, Carey, is we're in the most spiritually open generation. People are hungry. They fill this void, and the dynamics of trust have changed. The people's view of the church may have evolved in the outside world, but they remain spiritually hungry. And so there's this amazing opportunity, but also sobering kind of reality of church as we're doing it today. And I think there's a giant opportunity there. And there's some great proven answers to it. We just need to kind of decide if we're going to step boldly into a new form of outreach, or try to continue to play the come and, build it and they will come field of dreams type of mindset, which did well for us in the last generation, right? But that's not working anymore.
So that's a case where the stats were actually worse than I thought they were. Thank you for sharing that. But one of the problems that you and I have been trying to solve, me through my writing, you through your work, is, in your current role, you place ads that are funded by Christian donors for help. And people are asked if they want to connect with a local church. And you try to connect them with a local church. So these explorers, as you call them, respond to an online ad, feeling suicidal, you'll send them to a suicide hotline, or, hey, I really want prayer, or I'd like to talk to somebody, or I want to join a local church. I want to go to church Sunday, get me connected. You then refer them to churches that are signed up to a local church, correct?
That's right.
So if there's somebody in my community who responded to an ad, you're like, oh, we'll send them to Connexus on Sunday. One of the problems I've heard you describe, Brad, is that you can't get pastors to follow up on these, quote, leads, these people who have actually asked, will you connect me with a church? Can you explain what's going on there and the dynamic behind that? You would think if only 1% of churches think they're very effective at outreach, we'd all be jumping at, oh my goodness, somebody wants to come to my church, and yet you're finding it really difficult to get pastors to reach out to the people who are reaching out to them. What's going on?
Yeah, you and I have talked a lot about this, Carey, and I've moved through the stages of, bewilderment to, I'm actually seeing a pattern here, I think. And I don't think it's a technology issue, just to reassure listeners that are tuning us out, because this feels like a tech thing. I think really we need to fundamentally rethink the way we understand journeys of people. Another way to say this is there has been a fundamental shift in the way people and churches connect to each other. And it really stems, I think, from the way we all behave in every other part of our life. If I'm deciding whether or not to buy a pair of shoes, a new car, whatever, I go through stages of that, and I might look for a while, do some research. By the way, people trust their own research and decisions about 81% of the time. They trust what a brand or a company says about their product, maybe 15% of the time. So think about that. If you're a church and you're running ads and you've got a billboard or whatever you do, you can claim whatever it is you want about your church. But the way consumers are wired today is they want to do their own research. They want to check out your live stream. They want to ask around, and they may believe certain things about churches in general. So, Carey, when you and I sit down and talk about the fact that Gloo connects, by the time this airs, it's probably about 400,000 personal connections we've made of people to churches, which is, by the way, we're so excited by that. That's like 4,000 regular sized churches that we've filled, in theory. But yeah, you're right.
So those are made, not attempted, but like connected.
That's a person. We have their name. They've asked us to connect them, and we've done that to a specific church, offering that church then everything they need to connect and communicate back with that person. And that's the critical moment you're talking about is, does it happen? Does the church respond? And do they do so effectively? One pastor told me he was disappointed because when he wrote back to people, he was only hearing a response, maybe, I think he said, about 40% of the time. So in other words, send him 10 people, he writes them all back, 4 write him back. And he thought that was a failure. Now, Carey, you do a good bit of marketing in your business, and we do as well. And I know business leaders listening are probably like, if I had a 40% conversion rate on any campaign I run, I would be a hero. Like I would be promoted. But in ministry, we don't think of it that way. Those are journeys of potential attendees, potential visitors. We need to understand that not 100% of these are going to hit, and people are doing their research. They're on a journey to inspect and explore. That's why we call them explorers. So I think that there's a curiosity maybe missing, and there's a great opportunity for equipping all of us as leaders to learn things like funnels. Like Carey, you taught a great course just on, click to connect, literally understanding that there is a funnel. And by definition, funnels are big at the top, narrow at the bottom, which means you have leakage in the middle. And that's a normal marketing concept. We also think about in a physical sense, we like first-time visitors. A lot of churches figure out, how do we get from a first-time visitor to second-time or third-time visitor? There's a lot of great stats about the second-time visit is the most important. Those are analog principles. The same exact thing is true with digital, that we're going to have a nurture path to follow with these people, but that is not necessarily, normal mindset, normal behavior for most of us in the church. So it's a good chance for us to just understand our customer, if I can use that language.
So let's say a church signs up to get those leads. Okay. And it's like, yep, we're interested. We want to do that. And if there's somebody in our community who wants prayer, if there's somebody in our community who wants to visit a church and wants to connect with the local church we're in, what would it take to double that conversion rate, to double that outreach? So let's say somebody listening we'll pick a number, 100 new visitors in the course of a year. If they wanted to double that to 200 new visitors, what would they need to do?
Well, I mean, there's a story of two churches, which is a great answer to this, where they were essentially getting net the same inbound set of connections, but one of them, to your point, had almost double the result. And so we study this.
Great.
Right? So let's call it Church A was the one that had about a 40% response. And Carey, if you had written in maybe on a Facebook or Google ad and you typed in something like, hey, my wife and I are looking for some help in our marriage. We'd love to connect with someone who might be able to speak into what we're going through. This Church A would have written back something like this. They would say, hi, Carey, got your message. Sounds like something's going on in your marriage. Our church meets this Sunday at 9:30 and 11. We'd love to have you come visit. We're here anytime you need help. And they got between a 10 and 40% response rate to that. They might have shared a Bible verse now and then. Church B also got lots of inbounds, relationship, loneliness, requests for prayer, like you said. They would respond more something like this. Hi, Carey. First of all, thanks so much for having the courage to write in about your marriage. It sounds like something's going on, and I think I can help you. My name's Brad. I'm a pastor. When's a good time tomorrow to talk? And then they text this out and they put the phone down. Nothing about me, nothing about come to my church. Just, I want to help you. I'd love to talk to you. So you can hear a difference in, is it about me? Is it about them? And is it more institutional or more relational?
Hi, Brad. Here's my billboard.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So, but you can, this is not a technology problem. They're using the same tools. It's pretty easy to use. So I just think the difference you're asking is, how do we double? I think it's really, how do we develop a curiosity to move toward people and know that some of them we're going to be able to help and they may never come to our church. Some of them we're going to help and build trust, and then they want to come check us out. And we see if that pattern exists, those churches consistently see just a tremendous response.
So basically double with the second approach, thereabouts.
That second church,
in terms of responsiveness.
That's right. That second church, which is real, sees on average about an 85 to 90% response rate from their explorers.
Wow. Yeah, and it's intuitive. It sounds like, oh, you actually care about me. Now, I want to talk about the freak out going on in a lot of pastors' heads who are like, all right, that means I'm doing that 3 times a day and setting up 3 appointments. It doesn't have to be the pastor. Is that right? Or does it have to be the pastor who connects?
No, thank you for bringing this up. So I would argue in most cases, it shouldn't be the pastor, at least not the first line, what we call digital first responder. If you're a church of 90 or if you're a church of 9,000, you have someone in your church who would love to do this. By the way, this is a great ministry opportunity that can be done from anywhere. It's digital, right? So you could have a small group volunteer to take a night of the week. You could have an individual who's, not able to volunteer for other physical opportunities, but would love to sit behind a keyboard and just pray over people or get them connected. So I'm so glad you brought this up, because the churches that start strong, but sort of maybe peter out or flame out, are the ones where they've put all this burden just on the paid staff. The churches that learn how to replicate and, kind of cultivate a volunteer team, equip people. This is a mission field, and it's vast. And these are people that are actually knocking on our door. It's like one pastor said, this is like old school evangelism, except they're knocking on our door, not the other way around. Great opportunity to build a team around you. And those are the churches that have endurance for the long haul.
Yeah, I think that's such a good reminder. And it's so easy to see when you're the person getting that message. It's so hard to see the difference when you're sending the message because you're busy and you're like, hey, just join us Sunday 9 and 11 and we'll see you then, right? Is there a difference, have you seen, in responsiveness between the time the message is sent and the time that it's responded to? Like, for example, I think William Vanderbloemen has talked about this on the podcast before. The salesperson who responds in 90 seconds or so, 90% chance they're going to make a sale. And then it just peters off, like 24 hours time to respond, 7% chance you're going to make the sale or something like that. We're not making a sale here, but we're making a connection. Is there something about timeliness, like somebody can get back to them within the hour or the same day versus somebody who says, oh, I had a busy inbox, I got back to them on Wednesday, even though the message came in on Monday?
Carey, I would say our data confirms over and over again, time is the number one factor in getting a response. So if you can respond to that person in the first 10 to 30 minutes, because they're in that mindset, right? They just searched Google or they just stopped to scroll on Instagram because of what they saw. They're thinking about it. So if you can get to them quickly, your chance of engagement goes way, way up. The problem is, what do you do if that came in at 2 a.m.? And you have like a day job. And so there is a place to, again, maybe schedule coverage here, but that doesn't come without its, complexities. This, by the way, is an area where we see some ministries doing great work. Back to AI on how we might receive that message, respond to the person with, hey, we're working to get you connected to the right person. But in the meantime, here's something that would encourage you. Here's a video. Here's a message. That strategy we're finding is quite helpful. Once again, we see this in the commercial world all the time. Thanks for calling, or thanks for trying our live chat. We'll get to you.
One of my sons buying a truck as we speak, and I was showing my wife the truck. And I just pointed the screen at her and she goes, can't see it. I looked at big live chat bubble, all AI powered. Hey, I'm right here. Do you want to buy a truck? It's like, actually, I don't. So I clicked that off. But you're right. The world has gone there. Brad, anything else about churches? Because what it sounds like is, and this is what gives me hope. One of the reasons I do this podcast is a lot of people want to connect with God. They want to connect with Jesus. The church sometimes misses that stuff, and we got to close the gap. Any other best practices you've seen in closing the gap between the people who would go to church if they could connect and would love to meet Jesus and the churches that are supposed to bring people to Jesus? Anything else to close that gap?
Well, Carey, we talked a little bit about some lessons from business and whatnot. Marketers and customer success people know that the cheapest customer to get is the one you already have. And so what that means is there's an importance on retention and caring for and engaging with the individuals that are already part of your family. And in the church world, we call that back door versus front door. And we've seen a lot of erosion in our churches. You and I just spent some time talking about explorers, like new connections coming in. But let me give you one more sobering stat that we've heard. In a lot of our churches who receive these inbound Google searches or social media inquiries, as many as 40% of those come from people who are already churched. So let me explain that. So that means that someone went to Google and, for example, said, I may be feeling anxious, or I may be having problems in my marriage, or I don't understand Jesus fully. And they felt more comfortable going to Google with that question than they did going to someone in their church with that same question. And so we have an opportunity in our churches, I think, to understand that the customer journey, the funnel, so to speak, doesn't end when they just show up for first visit, second visit. This is one of the reasons why we're putting as much or more emphasis on a relational communications tool that we provide through Gloo. There's a free texting, and I know that sounds very administrative, but we do it for a very specific reason, and that is if you can help your church move from just being consumption to being connection, you have a much better chance of staying engaged with those people so that when life does inevitably happen they feel more comfortable reaching in than reaching out. So, running personalized engagement playbooks and templates and prayer series and all those sorts of things, really simple to implement. But a lot of the work that we're seeing great, churches accomplish that are really winning here is using technology, yes, to reach people from the outside, but also continue reaching people who are in our congregations, who are in many, I hate to say it, but they're always just 1 foot out. It wouldn't take much for a lot of people to find another avenue to help them when life gets hard. So I think
there's
that's
40 million nuns, like 40 million people who used to go to church in the US who just stopped, right?
That's right.
So true. Brad, anything we haven't covered that we should cover?
Well, I think I used the word curiosity earlier, and all the pastors I get to talk to, I'm most encouraged and most impressed with those who are showing creativity about learning about their people and understanding what's in their world. We used to have a phrase at my old company. It was an acronym called NIHITO, NIHITO, and it stands for Nothing Important Happens in the Office. And so it was just a mindset for us to get out, get in the world of those people we're trying to serve. And so I'm not really concerned if somebody's really excited about technology or they're a laggard, to your point. But I would say even to our laggard friends, if you could build in a rhythm of being curious about the people you're already serving and maybe learning more about the ones you wish you could serve and reach, what a transformative mindset that could be in the church. I know there's pressures. We're all dealing with staff and budgets and mortgages and all those things. But to me, that's just a simple, profound shift in mindset, is getting out of the office, getting in the world of I saw one pastor who had a clipboard after service, and he said, I would love to have a bring your pastor to work day. And anybody who wants to have me come visit your office, come down front and sign up. And I think every week he picked one of them and he would go just hang out with you in the office. And he was like, it was mind blowing to me, the stuff I got to see in a workplace because I'm never there. So I love that.
That's a brand new mantra. I wrote that down, NIHITO. Nothing important happens in the office. I'm going to hang on to that. Man, for all of you who listen to the end of an interview, that was gold and worth the price of admission alone. That's so good. It's so true. People ask me, why do you do so much speaking? It's like, well, I can only do so much here in my office. Like I think I know, but when you meet and you hear the stories, and I love getting out there and meeting leaders and connecting with them one-on-one and hearing their stories. And that's true of podcast listeners. Brad, this is so good. I want to thank you so much. So tell us, where can people find you online, and where can people learn more?
Well, I'm on all the normal social channels myself. And then for Gloo, our website is Gloo, and that's GLOO. We're good at a lot of things, just not great at spelling, but it sounds like the sticky stuff, Gloo. Gloo.us. That's our website. And certainly any church leaders that haven't already been there, there's a lot of great free things that you can take advantage of there. But we need it. We need every leader, we can possibly attract to help us understand what's working today in culture. And we're particularly excited, Carey, over the next several months, we're going to be talking more with you, I know, about the state of the church 2025. We're teeing up what we think could be the biggest single initiative of the church in North America next year. So we'd love to invite everybody to get connected to what's going on. So hopefully we can advance the collective might of the church, as we like to say.
Brad, thank you so much.
Thanks, Carey. Great to be with you.